As you know, I'm very vocal about many things, and I hope people tolerate me expressing myself as I tolerate others expressing themselves and being able to embrace them as friends. Many people, they buy into this cancel culture that if they don't like what you're saying, not only don't they want to listen, they want others not to listen as well. And that's where the problem begins. Yeah.
So why don't you give us a Torah perspective on how one should handle cancel culture?
The Torah doesn't have the answer for everything, okay? Common sense is very important. Even in Rabbinic Judaism, the notion of a svara, of a savara, which is a logical argument that carries biblical weight. Common sense is really so important. If you're a racist and you come to Torah, your religion is going to resemble bigotry and racism. If you're a decent individual coming to Torah or to religion, your religion is going to resemble decency. Torah and religion in general, at least ethical, with the ethical streams of religion, really just amplify your initial intent. They're there to get you the rest of the way, right? I mean, common sense gets you to the door and religion polishes you up. But if you start off on the wrong foot with a broken moral compass, it makes you worse in many times, specifically because you're spreading nonsense in the name of God. Whether the nonsense is bigotry, racism, hatred. I don't think there's a Torah perspective on this.
So what would the Torah say about? I mean, obviously, I mean, this is it was a cop, a goy killing another goy. But let's say hypothetically, this was a Jewish confrontation, and it was someone else in a Jewish situation. How would the Torah?
I think common sense plays a big role here. If it was an individual trying to protect other people, now the Torah, for some reason, doesn't include the role of policemen in society. All it has is laymen and judges. It never even speaks about prisons. Although there were people who were held in custody. Heck, even Jesus was in some sort of jail before he was tried. But the Torah doesn't really mention this. It does mention a city of refuge, an Ir Miklat. And it seems that the citizen plays a big role in policing the Jewish people. They rely on witnesses. They rely on people grabbing the person after he's witnessed committing the crime and bringing him to the court. So the role of the police officer is not one prevalent in Scripture. I'm completely for police officers, especially in a non-homogeneous society where people's loyalties lie elsewhere. I was watching these protests. There's a lot of people wrapped in Mexican flags, destroying property. That's chutzpah, to use a Jewish term. So this is why judges and even executioners are not enough in the society that we live in nowadays, even though that's all that appears in Scripture. Scripture doesn't cover everything. It's your job to police your people to a certain extent. I'm Hispanic, okay? We make up the second largest ethnicity represented in U.S. prisons. Every time I go purchase a weapon, people look at me a little weird. I understand that. That's not because of racism. That's because of collective responsibility. Racism or old-time prejudice is someone not liking you just because of the color of your skin. If I see a guy coming at me with a Quran and I'm in some neighborhood in Europe in the middle of the night, I'm going to feel less safe than if he's coming at me with a Bible. Why? Because of collective responsibility. Even though he might be completely innocent, he might be the sweetest guy, but it plays a role. And this is really the foundation of wisdom.
And it's the same thing with police officers. They often get stereotyped, i.e. you either love them, you're all for the blue, or you dislike them and you think that they wear their badge as a crown. You know what I mean? So
I'm somewhere in the middle. I could dislike cops personally and still appreciate the need for them in society. I just rather keep them away from me. I'll protect myself. Okay. But to call them racist, I mean, I know many cops. I have the same attitude with cops that I do with soldiers. I was in the U.S. Army, and I know that 99% of all soldiers will do what they're told, no matter if it's unethical. Right. Although they're allowed to disobey an unlawful order, they're still going to get sent to Fort Leavenworth if they do. I don't like puppets, and this whole COVID-19 lockdown brought out the ugliness of cops, the amorality, not immorality, amorality, basically just being told what to do and not thinking, is this the right thing to do? Now, some cops did speak out. But anyways, let's talk about Torah, guys. I don't want to talk about this guy.
What's up, Asher? I got a question for you, Asher.
All right, let's do it.
I was listening to some audio, and the teacher said that without the oral law, you would not have Judaism.
Judaism is a combination of everything we see in the Jewish world, even Reform and conservative. That makes up a big part of modern day Judaism. I think the best name, because there's no name really to the belief system that appears in the Torah, is Torah covenant. But that could also be embraced by a Karaite Jew. Like when people say that the New Testament is a Jewish book. Yeah, for sure it's a Jewish book. Das Kapital, to a certain extent, is also a Jewish book. It doesn't even compare. I mean, the New Testament is built off of ideas in what they call the Old Testament. If something's written by a Jew or it's embraced in Jewish culture, there's something called Jewish comedy nowadays. The Woody Allen, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David. Only because something is Jewish doesn't mean it's endorsed by the Torah. And only because something is part of Judaism doesn't mean it's also endorsed by the Torah. There's Kabbalistic Judaism. In my personal opinion, has nothing to do with the Torah. The oral law, in many cases, is more important than the written law just because it's applied more on a daily basis than the written law. Well, the written law is the base. But there's a lot of gray area. You can't run a society only by what appears in the 5 books of Moses. The opinions of the judges, consensus has to play a big part, and that is what the oral law is. It tells you to keep Shabbat. How the heck do you keep Shabbat? Well, you better have a consensus on how to do it, especially when there's a death penalty attached to it. So it seems like God wanted you to have a consensus on how ceremonial law was to be kept. It says that the months in the Bible are not determined by God. They're to be determined by the court. That whenever God in Torah speaks to the children of Israel to do something, it's not the individual children of Israel, but the ruling class, the judges and the priesthood take the reins on how to progress in a uniform manner. Yeah, the oral law is very important, but the base is the written law. Many rabbis get confused and they're like, oh, because the oral law is important, it must be more valuable to us than the written law. It's two different levels of importance. The Torah is paramount. It's the base. You won't have the oral law without the written law. Like, how can anyone say that? So it's really first stage thinking. When these rabbis say these things, I think they just say it because they're trying to sound impressive amongst other rabbis. Nothing makes you sound more orthodox in the Jewish world than praising the oral law over the written law, or making statements like, you can't even understand the written law without the oral law. What a stupid statement. Not understand, but apply. There is no way to apply as a nation the ceremonial commands in the written law without a consensus on how these laws are to be kept that only appear in the oral law. Yes, but the written law is not just ceremonial laws. There's tons of ethical laws there too. Now, if you're telling me that God gave us a book of ethical laws that could only be interpreted by rabbis who lived 1,000 years later, then take that book and throw it away. But we should be worshiping the rabbis, not God then. Now, ceremonial law is ceremony, right? How do you keep Yom Kippur? Do we fast? Do we not fast? This is, in terms of ethics, they're non sequiturs. Now, loving your neighbor as yourself, burning the evil amongst your midst, taking care of the widow, the orphan, the stranger, honoring your parents. There's so many ethical laws in the Torah that do not need to be improved or expounded upon. And this is the case. I'm telling you, Orthodox Jews make the worst case for the oral law. Okay, from saying that Abraham kept 2 Torahs when Torah really just means instructions, to saying that because he knew the difference between clean and unclean animals, that he had the whole oral law, when everybody understands that it was a cultural understanding. Even in Egypt, they didn't eat fish that didn't have fins and scales. It's cultural. Okay, there's a cultural understanding that's typically always tied to the ceremonial, and then there's an ethical understanding, which, even being that a broken clock is also right twice a day, other societies have ethical things within them, right? Only because the Torah happens to have an ethical idea that appears in the Book of the Dead, it doesn't mean that the Torah copied the Book of the Dead. It's just God cares about what works. And there are beautiful ethical ideas in the New Testament. There's beautiful ethical ideas in the Quran, but that doesn't mean that we throw the Torah away, especially when the Torah predated these works. What makes the Torah great is that it's consistently ethical. Not that it has good ideas within it, only good ideas that are within it, because there's other groups that also have good ideas within it. But it's the book that's transformed the world. Western society has progressed light years compared to Eastern society because of the ethics that appear in this book.
That would be kind of problematic if Abraham kept all the rabbinical laws, because he was serving up meat with milk and mustard and all that other wonderful foods.
Yeah, no, but then they'll say that it was milk before meat. I mean, they have ways to justify it. He did marry his sister, even half sister, which is prohibited in the Torah. I mean, Jacob also married sisters. It doesn't matter. Like, why can't we just go with what the narrative says? But the narrative said that the Hebrews, along with the mixed multitude, who received the commandments, or at least the first commandments on Mount Sinai, the transmission ended at the end of Deuteronomy, and that's it. And then it makes sense. But they go even further. They say Adam also had the whole Torah, that it was given to him by an angel called Raziel, and on, and Jacob learned in yeshiva. Come on, guys. See, this is when we...
How do we interpret the Mishnah or the rabbinic laws in a modern day and age, like 2,000 years later? Like, some of these laws are just so ancient. Like, how do you apply it? I don't understand. Go.
Right. So it depends.
Good question.
Some laws no longer apply because the reason for them no longer exists. But if the law was developed by this court, it could only be abolished by another court. So this is why we do things. I mean, for example, they've been trying to fix the whole notion of agunot, of chained women, for many years. And there are solutions on how to do it, but there isn't a consensus on modern day rabbis that they're all going to hop on board on it. So nowadays, if a man doesn't want to give a woman a certificate of divorce, she can't remarry. And if she does and has children with another man, then they're all mamzerim.
That's a really difficult situation.
There has to be another court to abolish it. But regardless, we have to make a distinction between rabbinic law and Torah law. If you guys break a rabbinic law, don't beat yourself up. I mean, they're man-made laws. The command in Torah, in Parshat Shoftim, is the command of lo tasur, of not straying from their instructions, basically acknowledging that they're there. If you happen to accidentally break a law, or if it's too stressful, like if it's going to affect you, just keeping Torah, the written Torah in general, putting a rabbinic law aside, don't beat yourself up. You're still acknowledging the authority of this court, but the court physically has no authority nowadays because they don't exist anymore. So the Torah is paramount.